Thank you, Ali. Yes, that's true. I'm a geek, and my name's Tom. And in the biosecurity team, one of the main roles I have is managing our monitoring around the region, so that's of biosecurity things and of terrestrial biodiversity. And today I just wanted to talk a bit about the importance of the monitoring data that we collect in a community conservation context. So what I'm going to go through in the presentation is just a quick summary of the monitoring methods that we use for different species and things like that. And who do we do the monitoring for? So that's for volunteer groups, usually really passionate people who give a lot of time to conservation, but they don't have that academic or scientific background to really guide them through. So an alternative subject or title for the presentation was The Necessity of Nerds in Nurturing Nature, and that's where we come in. And why do we do it? Hopefully that becomes apparent as we move through. So first of all, rodent monitoring. Rodents are a real main focus of a lot of community group pest control. They're a serious environmental pest. And monitoring them is quite straightforward. We use these tracking tunnels, just a core flute cover with a wooden base, and these are permanently laid out in lines of 10 through an area. And we put ink cards in them with a bit of peanut butter at each end and pull out the cards the next day, and you can see the cute little footprints that have been left behind. And from the number of cards with footprints in them, you can get an index of the rodent activity. And so we do that quarterly at the sites around Southland. As well as being really cheap and simple, they're also quite versatile. You could use these for other things if we wanted to, such as stoats. You just put a bit of meat instead of peanut butter. Or you can also use them for lizards. I've used tinned pear before. But at the moment, we're just using them for rodents. And those are just a couple of contractors and a very handsome-looking biosecurity officer using these tunnels. Possum monitoring is another main project that we run. Historically, this has been done using the residual trap catch method. So that's based on leg hold traps, also in lines of 10, but randomly spread out throughout the area that we're surveying. And from the number of possums caught per trap per night, you can get an index of what the possums are doing. And a newer and cheaper way of doing this, getting a bit more popular now, is using wax tags. So these are literally balls of wax on a glow-in-the-dark tag, and when you bring these in, you just have to go through and look at all the little toothprints in the wax, and you can get an index that way. And that's literally just flour and icing sugar, that white stuff there, that just gets the attention of the very curious possums. Bird monitoring looks a lot like an old man in the bush just looking around, because that's how we monitor birds. We use the 5-minute bird count method, which we have permanently set up in these areas as well, with GPS points that we revisit every year. And in those points, you stand there for 5 minutes and count everything you can hear and see, and then move to the next one. And by doing that year after year, we can get a good picture of the changes in species diversity and also an abundance of birds. And it sounds quite simple, but it actually does take a lot of skill to be able to pick up all the different birds going on at the same time. So that's Lloyd Essler who does it for us at the moment. And the 5-minute bird count method isn't known for statistical robusticity, but we've been doing it now for about 10 years, so actually getting a really comprehensive data set, so we can see a few things coming through now. And also to help with that statistical side, we've stopped doing it just one-off counts every quarter. We now do them all in December, so we can get an average and a good picture with the same budget. So the first group I wanted to talk about that we work with is the Bluff Phil Environment Trust. These guys are an amazing group of volunteers. They've been going since about 2008 and have got, I think, over 1,300 different traps and bait stations spread around Bluff Hill now, and they're still looking to do more. This is an example of the data that I'd send them regularly. So when we collect the data, I send it straight to the community groups. The big graph there is the rodent tracking, or the rat tracking. At Bluff, we've got a couple of those lines of tunnels outside where they do the pest control as well, so we can see that in the red line, which is consistently higher to where they do the pest control, which is good to see. Another few interesting points is leading up to the start of last year, there was a really low streak there, so they got them right down to about 0. There were 0 cards with rat footprints, so that was really exciting. And it's come up a bit lately, especially at the start of this year, a bit of a spike, but probably just due to climatic conditions. It's been a lovely year, and the rats have enjoyed that too. And on the right is the possum stuff, so they're doing really well. You can see before the group started, really high possum counts. That was 20% of the traps having possums in them after a night. Now they're really under control, so that's good to see. And just a bit of an explanation of how valuable that data is to the group. On the right there is an email that's from that spike I just mentioned in February this year. They see the email, they get the data, and they immediately put action on the ground to go out and do another pulse of poison and get the rats under control. And they really appreciate that data coming in too. Another example is the pretty little robin there. So leading up to the start of last year, when they had that really good streak of below 5%, they were able to get approval from DOC to release robin back into the reserve for the first time in about 100 years. So that was really exciting for the group and the community as a whole. And that got them the Environmental Action in the Community Award. So that's the happy trustee members down there. The next group I wanted to talk about is the Amaru Landcare Charitable Trust, also down on the way to Bluff, another really cool community of passionate volunteers. Just looking at their data here, it's very spiky. In the rodent one, just notice that blue's rats and red's mice this time as opposed to inside and out. In that real big, the first of the spikes in about August 2015, it was at about 40%, so we leave the cards out for one night and 40% of the cards have rat footprints in them the next day, so that's a lot of rats running around in the bush. So what the group did is they thought they had to do something about it so the birds could breed and things, so they did a pulse of 1080 in the bush, knocked them right back from 40 to 4%, and that's the same in the possums. You can see it went from about 20 to 1. But because it's a reserve isolated in an area that's not controlled outside, the rats came back within a year to higher than they were to start with. So they really had to put a lot of thought in there looking at this data and think, how can we control these things on an ongoing basis? So quickly what they did before that breeding season, just due to resources and time, is they did another pulse of poison so the birds could get through. And now what they've done is they've implemented this huge grid of about 500 self-resetting traps, so that's the orange dots, and that's maintaining the rodents at a low level and keeping that pressure on the whole time. And another really cool thing that's come from the data at Maui is in the bird count data. So it's no secret when you go down to Maui that there's a lot of birds around. That picture of tui there is just a bird feeder station in someone's backyard in Maui, and that is a lot of tui. But what's really special is also the kakariki have been popping up in these bird counts since 2014, and we've been counting since 2006, so it's definitely, they weren't there before then, and they've been there ever since. And so these are really precious birds that mostly you'll find on offshore islands or pest-free places. So that's really special and also inspiring for the group to see that kind of change, and we've seen that at a number of sites that we monitor around Southland as well. So in summary, just directly linking the science to the community results in inspiration for volunteers. So one of the tricks in biosecurity is that when you start to catch nothing, it means you're doing a great job, but that can be quite tiring for the volunteers, hours in walking around the hill checking empty traps, but this data just backs up the fact that they're doing a good job, rodents are going down, birds are coming back, so that's really cool. Positive relationships with the public. They really appreciate the data and they look forward to getting it, and it really builds into their programs. And I remember after leaving Bluff Hill when they did that robin release, somebody calling out Environment Southland rules. And as a council, you don't get to hear that every day, so that was quite cool. And ultimately, what we've seen is positive biodiversity change, with things like the kakariki being an example of that.
Environment Southland.